Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and the world. I'm Anna Stokes, Marketing Director here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. On behalf of the entire CCI team, we appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us. Today, we're joined by Mason Arnold and Daniel Nicholson to explore Mason's story about pursuing passion and finding fulfillment. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of business, as well as a movement of business leaders from around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement by creating learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalists through our senior leader network. Several times a month, we are offering these virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. Today's gathering will run for about 45 minutes. Mason and Daniel will be in conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition to audience questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes of our session. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during our time together. If you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Today, we are joined by Mason Arnold, a serial entrepreneur with fresh food, organics, and sustainability always at the core. His current venture, Mostly Green Life, is a media company working to make sustainability and environmental awareness more fun and approachable. In this session, we are going to hear his founder's journey and learn how sticking to higher purpose and relying on his values guided him through some difficult times and opened new doors that led to both business and personal success. We are also joined by Daniel Nicholson, President and CEO of NadaMoo, and also a board member of Conscious Capitalism's Austin chapter. NadaMoo is a dairy-free family business that focuses on cultivating the power of plants, leaving the planet better than it was found, and spreading positivity. Since 2011, the company has grown its revenue over 50 times, from being distributed in just a few hundred stores to now being in over 10,000 stores across the US and Canada. Daniel and Mason both call Austin, Texas home and have similar backgrounds in the sustainable food industry. We are so pleased to welcome you both and are so looking forward to your conversation today. And with that, Daniel and Mason, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much for those intros, Anna. Mason, it's so exciting to have this opportunity to discuss your entrepreneurial journey as a young entrepreneur getting started in Austin. I was always very excited to learn more about your work. We both have backgrounds as engineers from the University of Texas. So to have this opportunity to have this chat and really find out more of the details behind your journey is extremely exciting. I know we're all looking forward to hearing more. Of course, the subject matter is passion and fulfillment. In tough times, sticking to your values, even as things fall apart. We know of your business journey through Greenling to CC's Veggie Noodle Company to your current venture. And yeah, let's kick it off and really hear about that journey and how things got going at Greenling and how they evolved with these conscious capitalism concepts at the forefront of it all.
Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone for coming. And if I got a story for you, it's fun to look back on this story and laugh a little in the moment and going through it. It was the toughest time of my life. So for anyone who's not familiar, like I said, I'm born and raised here in Austin, Texas. I got a chemical engineering degree from University of Texas at Austin. And right out of school, I went to work for chemical and oil companies, filing permits with the TCEQ, the regulatory body here in Texas. And I was made sick by what was happening to the environment. Understanding what was being dumped there was really driving me crazy. My first company was an environmentally responsible landscaping company because the number one pollutant to Texas waterways is actually residential fertilizer. I grew that company for a couple of years and sold it. And then I moved to Spain to try to start a chain of restaurants. That one failed either miserably or spectacularly, depending on your perspective. And I ended up back on my mom's couch, broke, sick, and alone. And looking back on it, I was really just trying to chase money with that venture, and it didn't work. And so after a year, I had lost all my money, lost my girlfriend, contracted a parasite, and I felt like I hadn't actually done anything to make the world a better place. And so I decided no matter what I did in the future, that I was going to have lots of ups and downs as an entrepreneur. For some reason, I still wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I knew that whatever I did had to be driven by my values, because if at any day I could get hit by a bus and look back and think at least I felt like I was doing good in the world. And so that's what led me to Greenling, which was grocery home delivery focused on local and organic food. It was completely values-based, and it had a great run. We grew to all over Texas. We had our eyes on Amazon. We knew some competition was coming. We did not see Instacart and Favor and such come, who actually were able to push the cost of delivery down to, college kids who are using their mom's car and such to make deliveries. So it became very competitive, and I had investors, really smart guys, but very tech-focused investors, and they wanted to run the company like a software company and shut down deliveries for a while. And they just had some wild ideas on how to rework the company. We tried to compromise for a while, and that just didn't work. And so what happened was that I offered to leave the company because I wasn't going to run a company that I couldn't run with my values. And they wanted to abandon our values and just figure out how to make money with the app and with the online shopping. And so I hired a great replacement out of Whole Foods. He had done digital, he had done logistics. Greenling was a very difficult operation with a lot of moving pieces, and he was a great fit. So I hired a replacement and left the company, but I had no money, I had no income, and I was still a personal guarantee on about $500,000 worth of debt for a company that was losing money and had very little money left. So my sabbatical wasn't much of a sabbatical. I was basically, pining away, sitting around twiddling my thumbs, wondering what they were doing with it. One great thing that I learned in that time was the float tank. I started doing sensory deprivation float tanks, and that was wonderful. I was able to finally relax. I forgave all the people I needed to forgive in my tank sessions, and got to a good place where I was like, okay, now I can start over, which is what I had the opportunity to do. Greenling was 10 years, but I say it took 20 years of my life because of the stress. And I was able to revisit and say, okay, do I still want to be an entrepreneur even? And in the float tank, whenever I would clear my mind, all my mind wanted to do was dream up new businesses. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm still going to be an entrepreneur, even though this one just almost completely destroyed me. And I started dreaming up a new company, which would become CC's. And I get a phone call that we were having a board meeting the next day, and that the investors were going to shut down the company, even though they'd committed to fund it for another year. I went to the board meeting, was like, guys, you got to at least give me some time to figure out a better home for this. So there are farmers that are counting on us, employees that are counting on us. And they said, okay, well, we can let you try to figure out something else to do with this company, but we need a timeline. I'm like, okay, how much? And they said that I had 2 weeks. My face went white. I had 2 weeks to save a company that had, I think at the time, $50,000 in the bank, and it was losing, $50,000 a month kind of thing. So I actually had 96 meetings or calls. I clocked it, 96 meetings or calls in a 2-week period. And as I was digging into the fundamentals, I realized that they had done some good things at the company. They had shrunk the company, and they had bettered some fundamentals of it. And I realized when the company was back at that size, when I was running it, it was profitable. And I'm like, everyone I was talking to, I'm like, here's your playbook. I know how to make this size business profitable. This is all you have to do. And please buy the company so that people can stay employed. And these farmers who are growing food for this company right now can still do it. None of the investors would do that. Got one just horrible offer to buy the company where I still had to work for the company for free. And I was talking to an advisor. I'm like, I don't understand why these investors won't step in here. I like, this is something that I know how to do. And he's like, well, then you have to do it. It's like, no, it's the last thing on the planet I wanted to do was to step back into this company. But I submitted an offer to the company to buy it back with $50,000 from a cash advance on my last credit card that had any credit left on it. So I was buying the company back with the very last dollars that I had to my name that anyone would give me. No one was giving me money anymore at that point because it was a tough business. And the board iced me for a day. The lead investor was so upset, but he knew that he had to take the deal because my deal was just a cram down, left all investors still with 30% of the company, took just enough of the company to be 50% owner, and then a little bit of reserve for new people that I might bring on. And the other one was a complete wipeout of equity. So they had to take the deal. Iced me for a day and a half, took the deal. So I bought back the company that I'd started 10 years prior with my last money. At that time, there was $25,000 in the bank. We were burning $50,000 a month. I'm like, okay, I've got 6 weeks to fix this. And so I had a 6-week plan to break even. I managed to actually bring the company to break even in less than 30 days. I knew how to run the organization at that level, cleaned house, walked away from some equipment leases and things like that. And so got it to break even, but it was still a tough uphill battle from that point on. So I stabilized it and then essentially just sold it for table scraps, but leading with values. I got nothing out of it, but the farmers kept delivering, employees kept working, this machine kept running as part of a new organization at that time. And so while I was doing that, I was kind of also working on CCs underneath it. And I took a lot of the lessons from Greenling to CC's VeggieCo. One, as a grocer, I had seen probably thousands of products come and go in that 10 years. And I got really good at guessing which ones were going to make it and which ones weren't based on attributes, price point, packaging, all those things, and decided I wanted to try a food product. I'd also, leaning on my engineering, I invented this machine that we use and the company still uses today to make products. It makes it in a better way than all the other machines out there, even though there are professional machine companies making machines for food production. And combine that with a ton of consumer research. I did focus groups that were grand total cost me $500 to run a focus group because I would put a drop camera in my dining room. Wouldn't tell people it was my house because that would bias a focus group, but drop camera in my dining room. And then I'd be in a bedroom with a computer watching the drop camera. And the only cost was hiring a professional facilitator for this focus group. Did some focus groups, more research around it, invented the machine, and decided, I was in no financial position to take any kind of break. So I'm completely burned out from Greenling, but I had 2 young kids and I needed to work. So it was like, let's start up another company. And in fact, one piece that I forgot. So when I bought the company back and it was my last dime, I knew that if we had missed revenue in the next, 2 to 4 months by anything more than $5,000, and I think at the time we were still doing about $300,000 to $400,000 a month in revenue. So just a couple percentage point loss in revenue, and we'd be completely out of money, and we would have to shut down because I'd have reserves for payroll at the end. So I had all of the paperwork filled out for bankruptcy, both professional and personal bankruptcy, while I was stabilizing this company. And I had the lawyers ready to go. And I'm like, one day I may give you the call and say, file everything right now today. And that would start the process for bankruptcy. This was how close I was to bankruptcy. And so was able to sell the company with just enough and get a tiny, just like a few $1,000s that I was able to use to then launch CC's Veggie Co. And the other lesson I took from it was simplicity. I launched with 2 products. I had one vendor for all of my products, had one vendor for all of the packaging. I subletted space from a friend who had a food production space. So I only paid for the space and the time, and I used all of his people. So for the first year, I closed my books in 15 minutes every month because I literally wrote 4 checks. And I received, checks from Whole Foods for the products that we were selling off the shelf. And, then CC's completely took off. We hit product market timing just perfect. People didn't know they needed vegetable noodles until they saw it on the shelf. And then it was the coolest thing they had ever seen. And I still bootstrapped that company because I designed it to be profitable from day one. It was great margins early on, which erodes over time. I'm sure as Daniel can relate, but had great margins, profitable. And the 2 years later, 2 years from the month that I thought we were closest to declaring bankruptcy, took in first outside money with an A round and took some chips off the table. So 2 years to the month, I went from on the verge of bankruptcy to a huge amount of money in personal and business bank accounts. And, as I say, the rest is history. We hit number 3 on the Inc. 5000, and it's been just a wild and crazy ride.
Mason, I'm super interested in understanding, with the background in engineering, some of your earlier entrepreneurial experiences, what really had you wanting to get involved in food? Like I mean, people under that
that's
about myself sometimes too, but why the food industry? What really, what really inspired you to get involved in food as a path to entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my first company was landscaping. And so as I was running that company, I was learning more about sustainability and how to help the planet. That was a very, it was a localized thing here in Texas. And, we were managing a lot of lawns, and I actually developed a philosophical conflict with lawns to begin with. It's somewhat of a psychotic exercise where we actually feed and water this organism just so that we can cut it down and then feed it to grow it more and cut it down. And so I started to dig into what I thought the pillars of sustainability were and our biggest challenges as society. And to me, that was energy, water, and food. And energy and water are huge, mostly municipal projects, very weather dependent. There's a lot that goes into those. But then I also learned that food consumes, I think it's 80% of the potable water in the US is consumed by the food industry. And food uses more energy than any other industry aside from our cars driving around. So massive effects. If we can affect the food industry from a sustainability perspective, energy and water start to take care of themselves in and of themselves. So that was why I chose food to begin with, was that I thought it was the best way to connect with people. You also, we eat multiple times a day unless you're on intermittent fasting. And so there's a lot of opportunities to connect with people. In other industries, there's fewer opportunities to connect with people. And I think voting with our wallets is the number one way that we can move the needle for sustainability. And so being able to connect with people and help people understand sustainability and make choices for themselves and better choices for the planet was something that really attracted me.
Got it. As you touched on your Greenling story with your investors, right? And there was obvious misalignment, it sounds like, between the investor's vision of, how the company should be run and your own, the founders, the founder's vision for how to scale it. I guess as you look back at that experience, has it changed your perspective at all, with regard to how to choose the right sort of investors, or how to make sure that you are aligned with your investors in future projects?
Yeah, 100%. We went through a lot of different rounds, and even at Greenling, I said no to some money that I felt like was very misaligned. These investors, Greenling had a heavy tech component, and so they were great resources on the tech side. But when the conflict really arose, I realized that some of them, because lead investor filled up half the board with other tech guys. Some of them just fundamentally didn't understand how food distribution worked, and that you had to have coolers, and in order for our business model, for Instacart and Favor, you just go pick it off the grocery store shelf. But for our business model, working with local farms and working with local producers, you had to take that inventory and then move it along. So anyway, so understanding that they fundamentally didn't understand a big part of the business was a huge eye opener for me. And so when we raised money for CCs, I was interviewing venture capitalists and private equity groups as much as they were interviewing me. At the end, whenever investors, always ask, do you have any questions for us? I'm like, yes, I have a lot of questions for you. And one of the most important ones that I would ask investors, and that I will always ask investors, is what will you do as the investor on the board when you and I disagree and we have conflict? And some of those answers come back, well, we'll just keep talking until we work it out. And to me, that's not a great answer, because that can lead to gridlock and can lead to inaction in a time when probably fast action is very much needed. The group that I ended up choosing, Encore Consumer Capital, Scott Sellers had the absolute best answer. He was like, well, it's your company. I'm going to give you my opinion on what I think should be done, but then I'm going to back you in whatever you do. And I'm just like, wow, that is an amazing answer. And that's one of the ways that I'll go about selecting investors going forward.
That's awesome. I think people are always interested, right? When speaking to entrepreneurs, I mean, you have all of your battles, right? You're bringing all your battle scars along with you into the future. It sounds like even before Greenling, you had already had some really challenging experiences, and you, for whatever reason, you get back up and you want to keep pushing. You're just
Yep.
glutton for punishment. So I'd love to understand, like, what really continues to motivate you and inspire you. Like, where do you get the courage and the strength to continue getting back up and continuing to build incredible companies?
Yeah, after that first failure, I really had to dig deep on what does motivate me. I took some personality tests, Strengths Finder, DISC profile, and they were okay. Although, one of them, the Strengths Finder, I was like, I was talking to one of my advisors. I'm like, this personality profile says I'm unemployable. Like, none of these things are actually good for any kind of job. And the advisor is like, except as an entrepreneur. And I was just like, oh. And so, what really drives me is trying to make the world a better place. And so I have personal values written out, and sustainability is high on that list, and building community and my friends and family. And so I have these values that I try to live by, and I try to do things that I think will have the greatest impact and influence on the world. Now, in that, living in that way, and even for people who, I'm a values driven kind of guy. Some people are purpose driven and higher purpose driven. There's caveats to both of those types of philosophies, but a big one is like, do we really know that what we're doing is doing good? And often you don't know that going into a venture. You do the best research you can. You think that a general industry and things that we're doing, we hope for the information that we have now, we think we're doing good on the world. May come out later that, the fossil fuels that we use for delivery were far worse than the chemicals that we were saving from being poured on the land or something, right? Those are the kinds of trade-offs that you make. But generally, I think sustainability and, conscious capitalism in the history will view that as noble endeavors. And so that's really what gets me up in the morning. And sometimes it's the only thing that gets me up in the morning. And it is hard. And there's nobody there to still be like, you're doing a great job. It's just like, no, I'm losing money. This company is about to fail. And I don't know what I'm going to do after that. But every day, wake up and be like, look, we're, for Greenling, we're delivering high quality food, nutritious food to people's homes and helping them eat better. CC's, fresh vegetable product, organic, fair trade. We're helping the world be better. And we all need to eat more vegetables, no matter how much, unless you're, fully vegan. Often, even times vegans end up eating, too many legumes or different things. I think we all need to eat more vegetables. And so I think that's a cause that I will always be able to get behind.
Awesome. Last question that I have for you before we open it up to the Q&A. Just kind of curious to understand, as things happen, right, in business, with people, with investors, how do you continue to remain so optimistic or push forward without being, so skeptical or disgruntled around, the fact that sometimes things, things just don't seem fair or don't seem right the way that they shake out?
Yeah.
How do you stay optimistic?
I think I'm a little bit delusionally optimistic as a person. And so I think that has really helped me. And so in some ways it has helped me. I do believe it's a little bit of a disorder. And so I try to make sure to surround myself with people that have a bit more of a realist viewpoint or some better skepticism about the world in general, because I don't often share that skepticism. When I do, I can get pretty dark, and I can be pretty down on myself and on the world. But at the end of the day, when I look at the days where even in the face of diversity, I believed things were going to be okay, versus the days in the face of diversity, I was worried everything was going to fall apart. And I'm always worried everything's going to fall apart, but I actually thought things were about to fall apart and was down on myself. The days where I believed things were going to be okay ended up being better days and helped me get through things. And I think it was a GoDaddy founder has this list of like the 16 things that he uses for business. And one of them is like, no matter how bad it gets, they can't eat you. And sometimes as an entrepreneur, it does feel like they're going to eat you. And that on the other end of this challenge, it's just you go away or something and life doesn't go on. But it does go on and they can't eat you. And staying positive on outcomes while still working towards challenges, not ignoring challenges, but facing them on and believing that things are going to be okay. I think is just a better way to live.
Awesome. So I did come up with one more just to kind of tie it all back to conscious capitalism. We've talked about investors, talked about, sustainability, business for good, and all these positive trends there are in the world. How much further do you feel like we need to go from here, right? There's conscious capitalism, there's B Corp, there's all these very positive movements and a lot of capital that's investing against those movements. I guess I'd love to get your take as you speak to the capital community. How far have we really come, and how much further do we really need to go to begin to create some serious change with the
it's a good question. I think I think the fundamentals of a better way to do business are in place at Conscious Capitalism. And so I think it is now about evangelism and the rest of the world understanding the fundamentals that are in place. So I think we have lots of case studies, lots of great conversations in conscious capitalism and around sustainability. And so it moves into an evangelist mode. And I think we end up with there's utopian futures and dystopian futures. And even as an eternal optimist, I tend to think neither of those are actually going to be the case, that there are always going to be problems and there's always going to be challenges that we're trying to overcome. So I don't think we ever reach the finish line. But I think when the majority of business is being run consciously, then that is when we can say we, as a society, we can face any challenges that come.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mason. Appreciate all of that. We can open it up to Q&A from everybody that's watching this.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. So to move on to our participant questions, and I think this kind of ties in nicely with your evangelizing line, Mason. We have a question of which of the 4 conscious capitalism tenets has been most important to you on your journey and why? So
remind me the short version of the 4 tenets.
So higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. And I think the question is to both of you as well.
Yeah, and I think the culture and the orientation to me are, because everything is obviously top down, but decisions in all of my companies, CCs, we maxed out. We had around 350 employees. Greenling, we had 250 employees. And the hardest part about the organization was making sure that we could trust that the people on the front line were looking back at our values and our company values when they were making decisions, because everyone has to make a decision for the company at some point and doesn't have time to consult leadership. So to me, making sure that the entire organization is aligned with the values and it's part of the culture is how you are able to affect change as a leader larger than your own sphere of influence.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Like one of the things that I think is always most important is aligning all the stakeholders around that mission, around those, the purpose and the values, so that everybody is pushing in the same direction, or at least, more often than not, we are all aligned and moving in the same direction. That helps to that helps to accelerate the work that needs to take place.
Thank you for that. And I guess another question from our attendees, when you're maybe not all moving in the same direction, what moment on your journey tested you the most, and how did this community help you through that moment?
I would say the moment that tested me the most was before this community was around. I remember being invited to some little gathering, and I forget, it was just in some nondescript office building, but it was when Michael Strong and John Mackey were writing the book Flow, which predated Conscious Capitalism, and we're really batting around these concepts and started to talk about these concepts. And I went as a young entrepreneur and was like, this is amazing. No one's ever these words are blowing my mind. So the evolution of conscious capitalism from where it was to where it now is an amazing feat. And, I think the hardest moment for me in my journey, there's this moment after, major challenge, we're going bankrupt, we have to, fix things, and it's all adrenaline in those moments. And then after, it's always that, yes, you made it, but it's not like a big celebration and someone hands you a big fucking check. Like you made it through this challenge, and then you still have to go every day and keep doing those things over and over again. And to me, those are the hardest moments, are after the big challenge where we made it through, but now what? And that can be a very lonely and depressing place.
Not to keep on kind of the lonely, depressing, or negative train, but we have more of a comment than a question, but I think can lead into a question from one of our attendees. That so they're saying, my experience with investors is that they only care about the money, and how often do people really care about doing good in the world? So I guess kind of the question inherent there is, how do you find those people who care about doing good in the world?
Yeah, and I think there's a conflict of interest with investors that will always be there. Investors, the reason they're investing, the majority of them, there's always, they want some kind of return on their money. Otherwise, they'll go put their money somewhere else. Now, there are investors who the only return they want is to do good in the world. And that's great. And I don't think there's enough of those around. So, I always just try to be really aware that there is a conflict of interest, and investors are looking for a monetary return on their money. And that when the interest of that money comes in conflict with the interests of the business, that it's my job to stand up for the business and to stand strong and say, no, what the business needs, and the money will come later. If you're looking at making money or improving the business, we need to improve the business, because we all need to be looking long term. Now, where to find investors whose priorities aren't, first money? That's a great question. I think Conscious Capitalism is a good resource. I helped bring an organization to Texas and Austin called Slow Money, based off of a book that Woody Tash wrote. It's a national organization that's a wonderful resource for investor camps and investor groups. And we actually formed an investment club here in Austin, helping farmers and ranchers and such, giving them low interest, no interest loans, and just trying to help out farmers in need. So Slow Money is a great resource. And I believe there's actually a spreadsheet too. It's like 75 impact investment firms. And so most institutional money, they still need to make money, but will often have multiple calls in their investment thesis that could be, helping the environment and such. Daniel, you've been just trying to raise money in this space.
I think there definitely is there's a large and growing impact investment community that it's always worth looking at. I think they are some of the larger. There are very large institutional organizations that, as Mason said, have begun to direct new funds towards specific impact investments. But to those earlier points, yeah, I mean, they still do any sort of fund, venture capital, private equity, they're putting money to work for return. So it's always going to be a focus of their investment, because it almost has to be. They have to return money to the people who have invested in their fund in most cases. So yeah, I think that general conflicts will always be there, but that's where I really believe that, as the consumer begins to understand, choosing product A over product B because this one's a B Corp, or, they're very much established within the conscious capitalism community. Therefore, I should support them because of the ripples of sustainability that will be found if I do so. I think it always comes down to the consumer. The consumer can drive the market and can really continue to tip the scales in the direction of more mindful, more conscious operations and organizations that are trying to do good in the world.
Thanks for that. And to continue on the line of kind of working with investors and managing your investors. We have a question of, how do you deal with conflict with investors, and what tips can you share on dealing with conflict with investors who are investors or investment firms? How do you hold them accountable, and when do you decide it's time to part ways?
Ooh, I try to always remember what they are there for. And so understanding where they are coming from and what their goals are with the investment, and, how the rest of their investments are doing. Some of the, call it most intense conflicts with investors have come when, there's obviously some conflict between us and them, but it's when something else is going really wrong in their investment portfolio or with another company. And so they're coming from a very combative place because they're in that mode, they're in that fight mode. And so always understanding, where people are coming from, I think helps. And then making sure there's alignment around vision for the company and goals of the company. And if they agree on a vision for the company, but then y'all agree on different tactics from that, to me, that's when I try to remind investors that they entrusted me to run the company, that they're not the CEO running the company, and that I, always want their wisdom and knowledge, but at the end of the day, they're trusting me to make the decision, and this is a decision that I'm going to make. And then parting ways with investors, I don't think I've ever successfully done that, other than, but that the instance of buying the company back. I think finding, you got to find someone else to then take their place, which actually I've brought to the table with CCs a couple of times when I felt like my investment firm was, whether it was an act or they had lost a lot of incentive to support the company. I had other investment firms that were like, we would like to be involved, but we want to be the primary investor. And I'm like, okay, well, you'd have to buy out the existing investors. And they said, okay. And so I would bring that to the table occasionally when my investor set was behaving like they didn't want to continue to support the company. I'm like, I've got someone else who can do it. And they would always come through, or we'd find a way through that. So I don't, Daniel, you got any parting ways, advice?
I think that's spot on. To me, transparency is key, right? Like making sure you have a clear understanding of what everybody is trying to accomplish, right? At any given moment, because to Mason's point, things change. The issues of their portfolio are bigger than their single investment in your entity, and just being able to be extremely transparent and understanding of everybody's situation, what they're trying to accomplish, and then just really working to realign everybody around the initial vision for the partnership, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, and I've heard about investors. I've had friends, and they talk about the behavior of an investor or a board member being really out of line. And I mean, to me, that the final I told them was like, I guess you can fall back on fiduciary responsibility here, because it sounds like they're being petty and not, they're putting some petty disagreement. Sometimes it's investor to investor disagreements, and you end up with investors on board who dislike each other, and that can cause conflict in and of its own. But everyone has a legal responsibility to do what's best for the company, and hopefully you never have to remind people of that, but sometimes you do.
Yeah. And to your points too, Mason, I think it's important for founders, for CEOs of companies to just be really strong and stand their ground, right? Sometimes it can be this daunting task to be like, oh, am I really going to take a firm stance and disagree strongly with, the people who supported my venture, years ago? I think sometimes that can be an uncomfortable situation, but it's something where, there's a reason why you're leading the company. There's a reason why they invested in you in the first place. And you have to lean back on that and be able to just be strong and stand your ground and prepare yourself for, with an argument, with a constructive argument that can help rally everybody back around.
Well, thank you, both of you. I think you've both kind of shown us that you can be both kind and strong. And those are kind of crucial components of a conscious leader, right? So thank you so much for your time today. Unfortunately, we are at the 12:45 mark. So we really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah,
thanks everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks for the opportunity. And Mason, thanks so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions, Daniel.
And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Kim dropped a survey in the chat. So if you could just take 30 seconds to fill that out, that really helps us plan for future programming. If you're new to Conscious Capitalism, please visit us at consciouscapitalism.org for more information about the movement and our organization. And if you're currently implementing conscious practices in your business, we invite you to explore our growing support system of like-valued leaders in our Conscious Capitalism Senior Leader Network. So you can visit our website to learn more about that and join as well. And we hope you'll join us on January 27th for our next virtual gathering with Kelly Burton from the Black Innovation Alliance, who will be discussing activating your company's DEI goals for good. So thank you again to Daniel and Mason, and thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day.